Hi friends, and welcome to our Wicked cookie decorating class. I'm gonna go over what's included in your kit so that way you can feel fully prepared to get started. So you'll receive a box like this one, or there is one other variation if you received your box as a shipping option. When you open your box, you will find your pre-mixed icing colors, and inside each box you'll also find a cookie scribe tool. It's this little tool here, and you always want to use the sharp pointy end of your tool. You will also find 4 pre-baked cookies, and they have imprints so that way you have a much easier time when you are cookie decorating, so you don't have to guess the proportions or the sizing of things. So you'll find each one of your cookies you have in your kit. This one is simple and it is going to turn out like this. So I'm going to give you an insight into what each one of your cookies will look like at the end of class. And then I also want to highlight that we gave you 1 piece of napkin. However, if you know that you're going to be needing extra pieces, please go ahead and grab those. And then lastly, we have provided a piece of parchment paper, and that is intended for practicing each one of your colors when we get started. And you could also use it to lay your cookies on top of, so that way you have a clean surface to get started on. Now I will say that the one thing we don't include in your cookie kit are a pair of scissors, so you will need that before getting started. If you take a look here, we are showing you that Elphaba's hat is going to be needing very small detailing on the black. So that is a color that we would like for you to keep smaller when you cut your bag. And then we also are going to be needing our white to stay fairly small. So just make sure you're conservative when you're cutting each one of your bags. We can always cut bigger, but we can't make those holes smaller. And so lettering on Oz is going to be needing to be small on green. And then again, that white, we're gonna be needing it for all the detailing on the tiara. So that is your insight into cookie decorating with us today. We can't wait to see what you create. Please tag us on our social media platforms, and let's get started.
First, let's take all the items out of our box, and we want to take a quick look at this instruction card as it has helpful tips for getting started. One of the first and most important things we want to do is to incorporate each one of our icing bags by massaging our fingers throughout each bag, or pinching and holding the back of the knot and twisting it around until you see all of your colors fully incorporate. Now you will be needing a pair of scissors like I mentioned earlier. You're going to flatten your tip and you're going to cut as straight across as possible and as small as possible. We want to make sure that we take our piece of parchment paper, which you have at the base of your box, and you want to get started by testing out each one of your icing colors. Now pinch open the opening on your piping bag and then start squeezing and applying pressure on the back of your icing bag. Start with a small little dot, lift away from your piece of parchment paper and later on your cookie, lift up and away and drag the icing color. When you are ready, you're going to gently stop pressing and gently rest your piping bag down where you'd like your line to end. Go ahead and test out each one of your icing colors, making sure that each one comes out smooth and fast with minimal pressure. If you are seeing a lot of icing coming out, that it could mean that you need to pinch the tip of that piping bag and re-massage your icing mixture, or it could just mean that you cut a little bit too large, which is why I do want to always remind, cut very small. Go ahead and cycle through each one of your colors, and when you are ready, you are going to restart this video and we're going to get started on our first cookie. You're going to grab your green icing color. We're going to start with our outlining process. This is when we are going to create a border around the edge of our cookie, and we're trying to keep it as close as we can to the edge. So if you have to break apart like you're seeing here, I am only working on one movement at a time, and it's okay if I overlap the icing, because the next step is going to be flooding our base of our cookie, and that's going to be done by applying a lot more pressure. Now notice how my my lines are very, very small. That means that I cut the incision on my bag very small. That's okay because I can add more pressure or cut a little bit larger if I need to. I'm going to then switch over to my pink icing color, and notice how again I only focus on one tiny movement at a time. I rest my icing bag down whenever I am moving to a different direction. I am creating a closed outline, which means that the entire border is going to have the whole cookie covered with an outline, so that way I know exactly where I need to fill with icing with a lot more pressure. Now, I'm using the same green icing bag, but I'm squeezing at the maximum 10 out of 10 pressure piping, and I'm doing so by pressing with my thumb. I am focusing on first creating a thicker border around the edge of that outline, and then I'm going to go ahead and come in and start flooding the middle sections of my icing. Now, I can always cut my bag a little bit bigger if I need to, which that's the case on this particular color. I'm going to come back in and see how much smoother it's looking as I add more pressure. And then I don't need to worry about hyper focusing on filling everything all the way, because I'll lean on my scribe tool to drag icing to fill all those areas. So notice how I'm just trying to get a general coverage of this space with the green icing. The reason why we added the diagonal line across is so that way we have a clear line of where we want that green icing to end. And so I'm focusing on creating that thick border again and adding more pressure. Now, this is a looser icing consistency, and we have pre-mixed all of your icings to a great consistency for each one of the cookies you have to decorate today. So it should be a lot more on the looser side. And then what we do is we take our scribe tool and we move icing in a circular motion so it settles nice and smooth, and we just work on making sure that all of those pockets are filled and even. You can also pop any air bubbles that you're seeing as we're working with royal icing. That is a very normal thing. Now I'm testing out my pink icing color, and first I'm going to work on creating this thicker border on the horizontal line, and I want to take the maximum time here because I want to make sure that we don't lose that line, specifically as it's merging with our green. If you do accidentally pick up some of the green icing, then just make sure you clean the pink piping bag with your piece of napkin. That way you don't get any of that green carrying onto your pink flooding side. So same thing, we're repeating the flooding process, maximum pressure on the back of your icing bag. We're making sure we're working on trying to create an even flood, even though we are going to trust that it's going to flood into those pockets. And if not, we could always squeeze more icing into those exact pockets or grab our scribe tool and drag it into those areas. And if you notice that at any point the tip of your icing bag is clogged, just gently massage it. Sometimes icing or clusters of powdered sugar get stuck there. And rely on your scribe tool to make sure that you get all the icing moved into those areas. I also want to teach you about the cookie shake, which is used for making sure the icing blends in. Stab your scribe tool gently into your cookie and give it a nice cookie shake. And then just a tiny little gentle surface scratch to get rid of any texture. Now we're going to let this cookie dry for a little bit. We'll come back to it later. And we're going to get started on our hot air balloon cookie. Using our white icing, I'm going to start by squeezing a dot and using my wrist to move this curve around. I'm going to lift up and away and carry my line all the way to the starting point. And that is how we start a circular outline, which, believe me, it does take some time to practice this movement. Then we're going to come back to that outline and we're going to add a lot more pressure to the back of our icing, and we're going to carry it to connect it to the outline. So you want your flood to get stuck to your outline. And then we're going to come around in a circular motion and keep adding pressure until we flood this entire area with white icing. Now, again, you're going to be needing a lot of icing or squeezing a lot of pressure, I should say, into this area to get it all mixed in. Because I don't have icing on the edge of my cookie like we did previously, I could gently pick up this cookie and give it a gentle cookie shake. And that's how I get it nice and smooth. Don't worry about anything else on the exterior there. We're going to switch over to yellow and we're going to create an outline for the basket and then an immediate flood in the center section. Now, this process will become a lot easier for you when I say outline then flood. You know that one is coming right after the other. And we're going to let that dry. We're going to then move on to Elphaba cookie. And remember, the beauty of a pre-recorded video is you do get to pause whenever you'd like, so you can catch up and really take your time with cookie decorating. We're going to grab our green icing color. We're going to work on Elphaba's face. We're going to start with a dot on the corner there, lift and carry across. Now, if you're seeing breaks happening, it could just mean another little cluster of powdered sugar on my bag. Or I could go a little bit smaller if I need to. I do want to keep the cut on this bag a little bit small for all the lettering I have. So just keep cleaning your tip and then trying again. I am creating a full outline around the shape of her face. Now, we were very generous and gave you an imprint on your cookie, so this process should be fairly easy for you. And then you want to squeeze a lot more pressure, same as before. Follow your outline for the flooding border, and then come in and start flooding in the entire space for the face. And use your scribe tool if you're needing to. Always remember to keep cleaning your scribe tool as you need to, so that way you don't transfer multiple colors onto other parts. Taking our black icing color, we are going to start lifting up and away. And again, this is all in your wrist movement. As you're lifting away, you're creating kind of a lasso effect with your piping bag, and you want to make sure that you're seeing where you're dragging and then connecting it, closing it off all the way. When you are finished with that outline, you're going to add a lot more pressure and go ahead and flood the entire hat. If you're needing to break it up into different sections, then please do so. The point of cookie decorating is that you are having fun and that you are making sure that you're taking your time learning a new technique, but also making sure that you're finding what's comfortable for you. And we all find a different way to end up in the same place. And that's kind of why I love cookie decorating, is because we can all decorate the same cookies, but at the end we'll all shine through as different artists, showcasing our work so differently with given the same tools and the same instruction steps. So again, I rely heavily on my scribe tool for blending, making sure that I am moving the icing around, giving it a gentle cookie shake if I need to. Just make sure that you give it a little bit of a side glance, especially for a dark color like black, and that way you'll recognize if there are areas that you're needing to add more icing to. And when you're ready, we're going to move on to adding more black details to our Elphaba cookie. So it's nice to have all of these different sections already placed on the cookie so you know where to add it. This is going to be to represent her cloak. So I'm going to create an outline right below the neckline first, and then I'm going to flood it in right away. And then we can set this cookie aside and let it dry before we move on to our next cookie, which is going to be Glenda. And we are going to start with the skin tone icing color. We're going to outline around her face shape, and we're going to close off our outline entirely and then go right into flooding. And then we're going to let this cookie start drying for a little bit before moving on back to our hot air balloon cookie. Taking our green, we're going to start working on some stripes. We're going to outline each one of our stripes, and we're going to switch and alternate. So not every line is going to be green. We're going to alternate to every other. So notice how I'm skipping over one line and focusing on outlining even around the circular part of the white that we previously had done. And we're going to work on our outlines first, making sure that everything is right, and then we can go into flooding after. So create an outline for 3 different stripes, one for each border, and then the center. And taking that same green, you're going to go right into flooding. Now we're going to switch over to our yellow icing color, and we're going to create an outline for this bezel piece on top of our basket. And we're going to go ahead and outline it right away. And once we have finished outlining this piece, we're going to let our cookie dry before hopping back to our Glenda cookie. While we still have the yellow in hand, we are going to create an outline for her hair. So following everything on the border, making sure that we are going nice and slow on the edge there. And also taking our time going around her ear and around her head, so that way we don't mess up any of those areas or go past it. Once you have created your outlines, you can go right into flooding her hair blonde. And now taking that same yellow color, we are going to create an outline for another portion of her hair. And we're going to close off our outline all the way, making sure we're getting really close to her face and flooding this space in right away. When you're ready, we're going to hop back to our green icing color, and we are going to create an outline for the neck of Elphaba's cookie. And we are going to make sure that we are getting as close as we can. Even if you have to add the green directly on top of the black cloak, you can do so to make sure that it's a seamless transition. And once you have this outline, I want you to add a lot more pressure to the back of your icing bag and start flooding. Now, if you're noticing that these areas are getting really small, or depending on how big you cut your icing bag, then heavily rely on your scribe tool to make sure that you drag the icing to these areas. And now we can switch back to our black icing color, and we are going to start working on her hair. So taking that black, we are going to create an outline for the side of her hair coming right out of the below the hat. We're going to flood that in, and we're going to clean off our tip so we have a smooth starting point again. And we're going to create another outline on the opposite side. Now this area is very small, so depending on your cut, you could go right into flooding right away. And then we're going to continue cleaning the tip after each movement, but we are going to switch over to our hot air balloon cookie, and we are going to take yellow, and we're going to add the strings that attach our basket to our balloon, and you're just going to add a variation of strings upwards. Now I made mine a little bit of a V shape coming down, and then I can switch over to adding another color for the stripes. So that's going to be our pink icing color, and we're going to cap them off at the top. So they're completely closed off, and then we can you have the choice of jumping right into flooding this space, or you can re-outline if you feel safer getting really close to those lines, and re-outline with pink and then go into a flood. And that will just make sure that you stay within the space that you're needing to add flooding to. So go ahead and flood both of your stripes remaining on your hot air balloon pink. Now prepare yourself for some lettering, but do not be intimidated. We're going to start with a little curve, and then we're going to round all the way across, creating our O shape, and I'm not closing it off to the top. Then I'm going to create a little extension, and I'm going to be creating an outline for my Z. You can try to mimic this or just write Oz yourself with your own lettering. Then we're going to hop over to our Glenda cookie. Taking our skin tone color, we are going to create an outline for the neck on her cookie and jumping right into flooding this space. And now we're going to switch over to creating an outline for her crown, and we are going to use our white icing, and we're going to try to focus on all of these different curves really close to the cookie edge. We also want to make sure that we add an outline right above her hair, so that way we have the crown resting on top of her head. Now, I would like to say that while we're working on this crown, I would like to encourage you to add your artistic flair to improvising as you need to. I'm going to be teaching you a couple different techniques. So I start with a straight line and create an X, and then a separate line straight across to make my first star cluster. You have to break away each stroke to be able to execute this shape. So make sure you're cleaning your tip and make sure that you're focusing on small strokes as you're doing so. And then we're going to be moving on to adding other embellishments to her crown. Just make sure that you take your time and make sure that you're cleaning the tip of your icing as you're creating all of these different strokes. And now we're going to be adding a bunch of different squiggly lines throughout the crown to fill the space. Now, I'm doing so by creating a lasso effect as I'm adding a little bit of pressure piping on the back of my icing bag, and I'm resting it at any point that I'd like, but then I continue to go back into my little scribbles and doodles. I find this technique very comforting and soothing. Just make sure that you're really exaggerating the curves with your wrist as you're creating them, and just have fun while you're learning something new, because there is no perfection when we're creating a cookie like this. I actually like how organic it is. So add as many embellishments, polka dots if you'd like, more mini star clusters, maybe heart shapes, whatever you'd like. This is your cookie. When you're ready, we're going to hop back to our Elphaba cookie using our black icing color. We're going to now start working on the brim of her hat, and we're going to create an outline curving around the shape of her hat, making sure we're closing off that outline before starting our flood. When you're ready, we're going to clean off the tip of our black icing bag, and we're going to start outlining her hair. So there's a lot of curvy embellishments for her hair, and so you want to make sure that you're doing that with the movement on your wrist, closing off your outline entirely before jumping into adding a lot more pressure and flooding in this entire space for her hair. Now, a cool thing to notice here is that just by allowing a little bit of drying time between each section of this cookie, we're seeing the dimension coming to life. And so just by having a little bit of patience with that icing, something so simple with two different colors we've used for this cookie is really shining through and looking really amazing. Once you let that start drying off, we could actually start working on our detailing on the hat, and that's just going to be a little bit of a squiggly line effect, and I'm just gently adding pressure to my piping bag and moving my wrist up and down to create this fun stroke. Now, if you want to improvise and add dashes or X marks or whatever texture you'd like to add throughout her hat, feel free to improvise. I cannot wait to see what you create. I'm just giving you a general example of how to get started. So now we're going to go back to our initial first cookie that we started on, and taking that black icing color, we're going to start working on adding in another detail here, which is going to be her broom. And so I'm adding a little section. I'm hovering on top to make sure that I'm seeing how far I need to go. And so you can absolutely mimic this technique onto your piece of parchment paper to practice it. I am just creating a general shape for my broom. I could always change my outline as well. As you can see, you could overextend it. And then I'm going to go right into flooding in my broom shape. So go ahead and mimic this outline, go right into flooding, making sure that you're working more on the conservative side, as black is a very harsh color to try to cover up later on. And I would like to encourage you to take a step back and give it a glance. While the icing is still very fresh, we can keep extending and improvising the shape. And so this is part of learning that cookie decorating is a very easy to fix process. So while the icing is still shiny and glossy and fresh, we can keep extending it and adding a little bit more shaping. So I have extended the shape of my broom, added a little bit more roundness to each side, and now I create a brand new outline right on top for creating the hook of where my stem is going to come out of at the top. It can kind of sort of look like a like a bag with a top resting on top of it. Whatever you define the shape to look like is what I want you to try to mimic. And now for the handle on our broomstick, we are going to create a really organic and crooked handle on this broomstick. And so once you create that initial line, I want you to create an edge at the top and carry an outline all the way down before you start flooding in the center space. Now again, remember to be more on the conservative side when you're starting this, but you could always improvise as you need to. And now we have our broom in place. Then we're going to switch over to our white icing color, and we're going to start our little star, and we're going to create our wand. So we start with whatever best shape you can outline for your star. Notice that you can always overextend your points by adding more icing. You can also switch over to your scribe tool to really make sure that the edges are nice and sharp. And now I'm going to be adding small little strokes for glimmer around my star. I am taking my time adding each one of these strokes to make sure that no clusters of icing or globs of icing are coming out of my bag. So I am getting really close to the edge. And then remind yourself that the cookie is still very fresh, so you don't want to stab the tip of your bag into your cookie. And now I'm adding a second row of little tiny strokes around my initial sparks, and I'm making them a little bit longer. And so go ahead and go in between these sections. It does not have to be perfect. Just make sure that you take your time and you go all the way around to get it back to where we started, having a whole second row of these rays coming out of our little wand. And now for the handle, we are going to come from the base where we would like it to end, coming all the way up to the top, and then creating that outline border and flooding it in, similar to what we did with the handle of our broomstick. Make sure you take your time as this one. I have made mine fairly thin, but you can use any thickness for your wand, and that is the final step for that cookie. Now for our final cookie, we're just adding her earring with pressure piping, and that's it. I hope you had a wonderful time with us today.